Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and in my quest to learn the Brawler a little bit more in the beta for the Lord of the Rings Online, in the last moments of the beta, I want to take a more in-depth dive into the yellow line traits. Now, unfortunately, the yellow line with the Brawler is not one you can spec into. But otherwise, this video will kind of follow my typical trait analysis, the things I've done with the past two, and be a little bit less guide-like and more so that I am learning the class and sharing the experience learning, and hoping it is helpful for y'all to maybe learn a bit about how it functions. So we are going to be looking solely at the yellow line traits. I spec into the red line just as a reference because you have to spec into something, but the yellow line traits will cost 2 trait points, and we'll go ahead and start looking at that stuff. So everything I have here is from the red line right now, and I don't think it will come into play, but I have my heavy skills, my quick attacks, and then my balanced attacks kind of organized, set together, I believe. Just double checked, and that is the case. But anyway, the point is we want to look at the yellow line traits, and so far there's nothing actually to look at because we spec'd into the red line. But these traits are supposed to be supplemental to either red or blue line and give you, there's actually a lot of support, like group support options you can get in here as well, which is interesting. Even just like straight up evade chance, tactical mitigation, that type of stuff, AoE targets. So I plan to put points into everything, but we'll go ahead and just go over them. And one of the ones I'm a really big fan of, because it seems like the gameplay, kind of baseline gameplay we have with the Brawler, is that metal generation feels a little bit odd and a little bit slow, especially out of cooldowns where you generate extra metal. So I really like a skill like this just to have a chance to generate more metal, and that's something I'd almost like to see expanded just in the class in general, generating more metal, but this definitely helps with that, so I'm a fan of that trait. Also, AoE skills affecting more targets, something like the blue line force taunt that you get specking into that, this would be quite helpful with that. But especially with the red line, a lot of your abilities are like 3 targets or something like that. I believe actually we can look at it. Backhand clout, for example, is 3. These are 3. So yeah, they're 3 targets. This will help you fight 6 targets with this. So if you want to, if you are in fights with AoE with more targets, which is kind of frequently in my experience, that will be quite helpful with that. But maybe if you're a solo player and just leveling a Brawler, my initial reaction would be that that might not be worth devoting points into if you aren't fighting many enemies at once. But anyway, that is that trait. Pretty simple, straightforward what it does. Next up, we have vulnerable application chance. So this is something that is, I don't think quite made clear, or it actually is, but it's something easy to look over, and that is that vulnerable is not guaranteed to be put up. So vulnerable is from using low strike as a setup for a metal spender. As we covered in the gameplay basics, this will increase incoming damage by 1% whenever you get the vulnerable buff. There's also these certain skills may take advantage of vulnerability for added effects. There seems to be no actual implementation of anything like that with the Brawler right now, but that only has a chance to apply. This will give it plus 50%, and I don't know the initial application chance, but if we put points into that, and I get enough metal and use the setup, we can see now it did do vulnerable. I don't know if this moves it to 100% chance, if it actually is guaranteed. We can try this a couple more times just to see if it actually does refresh. It did refresh there. But the point is that will increase the consistency of that essentially, which is also something I'm a fan of, because this is already not the strongest thing and having it consistent would be good. That said, I don't know if it's worth 5 trait points, or it'd actually be 10 trait points. I don't think it is worth 10 trait points to get that right now, because vulnerable is 1% incoming damage, and that's a lot of trait points for that little of an effect to guarantee it. Also, increasing the duration on that is a little bit odd because of how like ineffective it feels, but that would mean you need to apply it less. I don't know again about being worth 6 trait points at this point, but doubling the duration of essentially of that with 3 points in it is how that would work and would be helpful with that. I also realized I went kind of out of order. This is just plain old evade chance, and we already went over actually this is just plain old tactical mitigation. And then we have an active skill here, actually a cooldown. So this one is strike as 1. I think this is an interesting, oh yeah, the trait only says that you get it, so we will apply that and see what this cooldown skill is. So this one increases damage, but if you're alone, you get a 25% damage buff, but if you are in a fellowship, you kind of share that buff, and you all strike as 1, as it says. And everybody in the Fellowship, including yourself, gets a 10% damage buff. So this is where the little bit of support, as you may be able to call it, brawlers can get that with stuff in the O line. This is going to be a Fellowship buff. If you're doing group content as such, which is of interest for things like this often, you're going to get a Fellowship buff for quite a bit damage, and it has 30-second duration. That's a pretty long duration on only a 1-minute cooldown. And we can even see that as you put more points into the strike as 1 damage increase, that can go all the way up to, I believe that will be 20%, because both effects, actually just the Fellowship, no, both effects, I misread that at first, both effects get plus 10% damage with this trait. So that is quite the strong buff, and yeah, that is something that is going to be in the yellow line. It will require quite a bit of points investment, but that's exactly what these traits are for, your extra points that you end up left over after you finish what you want in like the blue or red line, or even both lines, depending on how you're building your brawler. And this is a quite strong contender at this point, and again, an example of how the brawler has some sort of support elements. So Death Feint here, moving on, Death Feint here will, let's go ahead and close everything out. This will just make Feint restore an additional 3 metal. Right now it restores 3 metal. By this trait, it should restore 6 metal now. Actually, yeah, it still says fills 3 metal, but it says adds to 6 metal right there. So just to double check that does function correctly, we should be able to use 2 metal consumers there. We did, and it worked. Next up, we have all of our sharing innate strength buffs. So this one requires knowledge essentially of the innate strength stuff, which I can pull it out for reference. You see I am running low on time, 15 minutes to essentially finish up this video. I think this is the last one I'll be able to get to doing today, but here we have both the increased damage, finesse, and critical rating, and this gives your allies a portion of that, of these buffs. I don't know the portion, and I think I would have to be in a Fellowship. I don't know if this random person would accept my invite to the Fellowship, but that is what these do. You can't see it, it doesn't give me any benefit of that, but that's the general function of it, and it's pretty interesting, I think, and can be very strong if you give... I would really have to know the portion. This is a little bit of just unfortunate circumstances that I don't think it can quite test this here, but you give a portion of that buff, and kind of similar with whatever the blue line, that I guess mitigation one, the threat one probably wouldn't be the most exciting for a blue line brawler to give everybody in the Fellowship extra threat generation, but the mitigation one could be interesting there. And again, the biggest one I'm thinking is raw power here for the red line. Share a portion of that buff, which would be, in the case of the red line, would be the quick attacks giving increased damage, and sharing that buff could be a bit strong. Now, the next set of traits we have here in the yellow line I actually find really fun. They're interesting, but well fed here. Brawlers gain extra benefits from cooked food. So just getting 10% extra stats from cooked food is quite interesting. And then trail food get up to 15% as well. They're really weird traits, but my initial reaction is that I actually like them. And it sort of makes sense if you think about the brawler like being in a bar, that type of situation, and then eating food essentially, and getting extra benefit from it. It seems like they would be kind of evolved or tuned towards getting extra benefit from food and making the most of it. So I get the thematic idea there. I am going to... go ahead. I think I need to decrease points in something to get the last 2, so we'll just take points off of that. It doesn't really have impact, and look at the rest of the stuff. All right, so moving on, I do want to go ahead and cover these last traits, and efficient strikes is the next one. This one gives just increased pip change mod. This is going to be a 5-minute cooldown skill, duration 20 seconds if I actually pay attention to it a little bit better. So this will just give you increased metal whenever you use a metal builder. You'll get an extra metal with that. This is a really long cooldown. I'd say that's the big drawback with this that doesn't make it too exciting to me. It seems like something that should be really exciting to me since I've talked about really liking extra metal building, but an extra metal generation. But this has such a long cooldown that it feels like something inconsistent and kind of sort of a rare occurrence that you'll actually be able to use it, because it has a 5-minute cooldown. So unfortunately that one is unexciting to me, but balance wise maybe it is fine. It also seems a little bit kind of weak balance wise, but maybe it's okay because brawlers have a lot of cooldowns. There's a lot of interesting things with their cooldowns about potential setting things up like that, then feeling very weak maybe outside of the cooldowns and very strong during them. Don't quite know what that, but anyway, the next trait, the last trait we actually have to look at today and for the yellow line is Hasten Powerful Techniques. So this one will just, whenever you use a setup attack, it'll reduce the cooldown out of a lot of abilities. Iron Will is going to be a blue line trait. Joy of Battle is both red line and blue line. And then Weather Blows is going to be for all of them. 5-minute cooldown. Setup attacks will reduce the cooldown of that by 1 second. Draw a Line in the Sand is blue line. Battle Fury is red line. Yeah, it is this one. Joy of Battle Offense. I feel like regular Joy of Battle already covered that. But anyway, it does that. And Efficient Strikes. I honestly don't remember that one immediately. But, oh, that's actually the yellow line thing. The last one we get here. So, yeah, whenever you use a setup attack, it'll reduce the cooldown of those longer cooldown abilities, which is always nice, I think, to be able to reduce the cooldown of something like that. Especially because a lot of them I consider to have too long cooldowns to be very exciting or interesting, to me at least, initially. Anyway, I do want to go ahead and do a summary here of the yellow line now that we actually finished all the traits. I'll go ahead and just apply that to actually have that, but it does seem like the yellow line is quite supplemental to the other specs. I feel like the evade chance is probably the one that feels like it doesn't belong the most. I know that would be helpful for tank, but probably not for DPS. It might not even be too helpful for tanks. Tactical mitigation is one I could see being used by either line, so it seems reasonable, although more likely tanking line unless you do for some reason need tactical mitigation as your DPS, which is entirely possible, it seems. The vulnerable application chance, this is a whole trait line here in the trait line that I feel like is just another example of something that is boring and just doesn't belong here. I feel like the vulnerable debuff should be guaranteed anyway. Now the duration I would say is more interesting, but still it would have to, I feel like the vulnerable debuff would have to be stronger. Again, it's 1% incoming damage, and I just can't, I just not the biggest fan of these. I feel like I think they should essentially be inherent things to the vulnerable debuff and the vulnerable debuff. I don't know if it should necessarily be stronger, but perhaps it should be able to tier up a little bit over time, or just something a little bit more to it than what there is now would be nice. And that's kind of the reason I feel like this is something that's just so unexciting and just doesn't really belong here and should be baked into the vulnerable debuff from the low strike setup. Otherwise, the AoE targets, I think I already covered. That is a good one. I really like battle-wise. That one does apply to, I think, both specs pretty well, so does max targets. Strike as one seems like more of a DPS thing, but I guess it's not a problem if a tank brawler gets the damage support trait here. Strike as one, that cooldown skill. Otherwise, what do we have? Death Feint, that is, I feel like that is a really good trait to be in the yellow line as well, because it's something you want on both specs, and it just simply doubles the effectiveness of it with the metal there. Let's see. Yeah, the sharing innate strength balances, it seems like it'd be hard to actually balance that out as a brawler player to me. Maybe that's just would be me, my playstyle, perhaps feeling a little bit off with that, but I could see these both being strong and weak at the same time, especially certain ones being strong and weak, as we covered earlier. And then finally, the food ones I pretty much liked and found them surprisingly thematic and flavorful towards the brawler. And then these, at least the efficient strike, seems like a little bit of a long cooldown and unexciting effect for that long of a cooldown. I'd love to see it with a lot shorter cooldown. Especially being this deep into the L line, it seems like it should be a stronger trait to be at the end of the L line. I know you wouldn't, in reality, build all the stuff in the L line that took 94 trait points. Don't even have enough trait points to get every single trait, every single rank, no matter which, if you're blue or red line. But the last one here, again, that seemed okay to me, and probably the one I'd be more excited to pick than Efficient Strikes, given the choice between these two. And that's kind of the summary of my thoughts on all the stuff we went over today with the L line. I know this is probably less exciting than the other two specs, but I still thought it would be interesting to individually look at these traits and kind of learn them together. As with the other ones, if you have any feedback, please do let me know, but this is actually the last I will be able to record of this learning brawler from the beta series that I have going on, and I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something throughout this entire series about the brawler. I have, while it has been kind of rapid fire with them myself, I have enjoyed learning more about the brawler, diving more into the class, which was kind of the point. I did decide to do this in video format instead of stream format so I could concentrate and just kind of break it down and not really get distracted by other stuff, and have it in video format, even though this has kind of been like loose, again, learning myself, not necessarily teaching you all, doing a guide. The class just came to beta. And still, I hope that maybe helped you all learn a bit about the brawler and see some of my thoughts on it. I did give, again, my reactions and some feedback I had based on what I have seen. But anyway, with all that, again, the point is, I hope it was helpful and enjoyable. And if you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing for more, or becoming a channel member to support the content. And thanks for watching, everyone.